All right. Well, hello, and welcome to Intercultural Spark, where you will be inspired to leverage your power. You will learn a new exercise, and I hope actually you'll have fun. So I am your host, Deanna Schaas, and there is nothing like starting the day with three people that you really like. I've actually only met one of them in person, but I count all three as friends. And that, my friends, is the power of networking. So Dr. Tanja Coleman, she is diversity and leadership development architect. She's a keynote speaker. In fact, that's how I met her, an author of Who We Are and on the faculty at Loyola University's their business school. Tom Martin is a leader in the field of media and public relations who actually called Charles Kuralt his personal mentor. And he recently launched an online course on do-it-yourself public relations for authors. And I'm excited to welcome Walter Lucky Church Simons back to the show. Again, Lucky is a celebrity publicist. He's a master relationship builder and networker, and then also the director of client relations at Mungo Creative Group. So welcome to Intercultural Spark. Good morning. Good morning. I love it.
I'm glad nobody can see my dance.
I know. Like we can do it now. Like I don't know about you. I'm like the type where if I'm walking down the street and there's music playing from the store, I actually have to start walking on the beat. So
Yeah.
you too.
Guilty. Yeah.
And three, how can you not? It's like you get that do. So
Yes.
that is fantastic. So I love the energy of that. And I'm so excited. So we're coming in from, Tanja and I are both in Chicago. Lucky, you're in New York, and Tom, you're in Connecticut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Good. So coming in from across the country. We are going to, for those of you watching live, really appreciate it. Just remember, please say hello. We'd love to know that you're here and who's here. So say hello, and you can also ask questions in real time. But speaking of starting our conversation, I am curious what a favorite conversation starter is. I think a lot of people, you get into networking, and we're going to talk in person, and we're going to talk digital as well. But sometimes people are like, I don't know how to start. And so actually, I'm going to start since Tanja, you're right next to me. What's your favorite conversation starter?
For me, I really like to kind of find out what is interesting to people. So I will ask them, like, what fun things have you done in the past month? And it gives you insight on their hobbies, what they like. And then it's a really great icebreaker, because oftentimes in networking scenarios, people come right up and they ask you, well, what do you do? Mm-hmm. And it can be a little off-putting if you don't know someone. But if you ask them fun things that they enjoy, then you can morph the conversation. You ultimately get to the what do you do? But it's a smoother and more memorable charter to get there.
Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes, Tanja, on the flip side, and this is something that when I get nervous, I do, rather than saying, what do you do? You know, in intercultural stuff, we always say, well, talk about yourself first, you know, at least if you're asking a question. But then I find that sometimes I err on the part of saying something about myself, and the people are like, great, thank you, you know, and then leave. So that's hard too, to know where that balance is of asking and then, but then also sharing at the same time. And Lucky, I see you nodding your head. So what do you think about that? What's a question that you like to start with?
Perfectly stated, Tanja. That's absolutely beautiful. But for me personally, I just use a compliment. I find something that somebody may be wearing, or just something they may have said during the speech that I was listening to, or just some kind of common bond between the two of us, to compliment them on it, just to say, hey, those shoes are amazing. And usually those kind of things are instant icebreakers, and it's naturally who I am as a person. So I just find whatever works for me in daily life, and then I apply that to how I approach business as well.
Mhm. I'm pretty sure when I met Tanja, because I met her, she spoke at an event. And Tanja, how tall are you? I feel like Tanja's like 6 feet tall, and she always wears these bright colors. And so I think my first words to Tanja were like, "Oh my God, you're fabulous!" You know?
I'm actually I'm actually 5'10", but I always wear heels, so that
I like that. I'm actually
I always wear
5'10".
heels. Yeah.
Wait, thank you for clarifying to the person who's 5'3". Like 5'10", 6 foot. It's pretty much in the same neighborhood.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, so funny. Tom, what about you? What's a go-to opener for you?
Well, it's funny. My dear friend Lucky probably, I think, knows I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. I've learned a lot from Tony over the years. And so one word that's often associated with Tony is passion. And so I often ask people, if I'm interviewing somebody for the news or whatever, or just meeting somebody, through friends, I will ask them what they're passionate about. And it's funny, I often quote, Malcolm Gladwell of The Tipping Point, and he said, there's something called the 10,000 hour rule. What you're passionate about, just like, big business leaders like Bill Gates are passionate about computers, obviously, they will just devote themselves to that subject. And so when you ask somebody what they're passionate about, it all comes pouring out. And sometimes, again, I know Lucky has, I'm sure, met many more celebrities than I have over the years, but a couple times when I have worked with celebrities, say at ABC or whatever, I will ask them about a subject that's not related to their main focus, because we all have, several different passions, and that kind of opens people up. But I think that's a good question for anybody, really.
That's how we met. You asked me what was my passion, so.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
I love it. So already we've all actually tried this on each other. Well, let's look at, so right now there's been a huge transition. So this is now 15 months. We're starting to get back out to doing things in person, but pretty much, 15 months ago it dropped off and everything was digital. And so for those of us doing in-person networking and then to shift to digital, it was a big shift. And so I'm wondering what you all see as the difference between the two, and then maybe even share some things that happened or that benefited from switching from one to the other. So Tom, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure. Many ways to go in answering that question, but two things come to mind real quick for me. One is that although there's certainly been a hard downside to what we've been going through the past 15 months, it has also shaken us up, because, I remember talking with a friend back in March of 2020 saying, we're not doing the same mindless routines, driving the car, taking the same route, going the same store. It's shaken us up, and, it's like, well, I won't what we've been through just to get shaken up, but it has disrupted our daily routines. And so for me, that's brought some new business opportunities, some new people into my life, and that kind of thing. And also, I think, because it has been such a hard time for many of us, and really for all of us in varying ways, I think just remember to be, I think it's important to remember to be kinder and gentler to people when we do get together. What have you been going? How are you? And not, well, let me list all the terrible things, but just I care about you. It's so good to, because there's a certain energy when we do get together in person, I think.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
I think something that if people were smart enough to receive this message during the time of the pandemic, the importance of writing, the importance of an email, was something that I don't think people understood previous to just meeting in person and regular interactions. Most people are so short via email. And I'm going to just throw a little story in.
Please.
One time when I wrote an email to somebody, I was communicating them with for months. And when they actually met me in person, they didn't believe that I was the person that was emailing them. And it had nothing to do with me being Black, had nothing to do with me, as a Black man. But he was like, I thought you were this 80-year-old lady somewhere in Georgia answering emails. He said, because you were so polite, so kind. And he said it was just beautiful to receive these emails every day. And he was like, you don't understand. He said, I would see your name, and then that would be the first email that I would answer, not knowing that Lucky Church was this man that is standing in front of me. So he was like, thank you for that. And I think sometimes people forget that networking is beyond just person face to face. It's in every detail of how you would communicate with people, such as an email and how you present yourself.
Mm-hmm. But how do you, I'll throw this back to everyone. I'm just curious though what the content of those emails were. I know one of the things with networking that can make people nervous is when you don't necessarily understand what people's roles are. Like the idea of like, do we understand what we are in relation to each other? And you don't always know that at first. So I'm curious what the content of those emails were. Was it driving towards business? Were you just checking on them? Was that weird? Like, what was the
No,
content of it?
those were just where I would get invites. So
Mhm.
it would be a cold email to me, just wanting to invite me to an event or to give my response to something. But my response was always greetings or greetings, king or queen. I use that word a lot because well, one of the main reasons, let me not lie, is I'm just bad with names sometimes. So that's say number one. I'm just being honest. But I also feel like greeting people like royalty is something special. So I would just greet them. And that would then lead them to want to invite me to every event that was on their list or just want to meet me in person, set up a quick coffee. So it was always just something that where people reached out to me. And then I just broadened the relationship just because of my kindness and being nice to them. And that was instantly returned back to me.
So fun. I love it. The kindness, because we all get cold called all the time. And
Yeah.
it's usually easy either not to respond or to be like, yeah, I'm not interested. It's interesting that you look at each of those as, it sounds like almost as a opportunity for a relationship.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%, 100%.
Yeah. Tanja, I see you nodding your head as well. And I know for Tanja and I, it was more just that and I'm going to say we, because I think this is true. We just really liked each other. And so it was kind of like, well, we just have to get together. One of the things I like having started the show is if I meet people I really like, I'll invite them to be on the show. But so that's actually been kind of cool too.
Yeah, I agree with Lucky in that we have to extend kindness and we have to extend forgiveness. And one of the things that I was even coaching some of my business clients on is when the pandemic first happened and everyone was remote, I think folks were concerned that people may not be doing what they're supposed to. So when they would get on the digital calls or the Zoom calls or what have you, they would automatically go into what have you done? It was project, 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 business, business, business.
Mm.
And, in the background, people's homes are, figuratively burning down, right? They have kids, they take care of their parents, they're worried about this pandemic, they may be taking care of someone that was actually had COVID, and all of that was being ignored. And so I really had to coach a lot of my clients on how to soften the edges. You never just jump into a conversation and start talking business. And in fact, you may even have conversation where you're just talking about how are you? This is just a how are you conversation. And I think the same extends to networking. When the pandemic happened, everyone was, I think, a bit panicked in terms of how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to sustain myself, particularly entrepreneurs? So I just saw a high influx of cold calls, emails, people maybe not doing their research. And it was really, it's easy to become impatient with that, but you also have to understand where people are coming from. And to Lucky's point, really meet them with kindness and generosity. And even if it's something you're not interested in or can't engage in, you try to respond. You try to respond gracefully and kindly and et cetera, because people were really, really going through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to pull out my tambourine on that one. That was
I love it. So, and actually, I think I even have a shirt that says, "In a world where you can be anything, be kind."
Yeah.
There is something to say, or practice random acts of kindness. There is something to be said. I've heard the phrase too.
Deanna, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
please.
I have a handful of favorite quotations, and one of them I can't resist giving it, sharing it with you guys. They quote the Dalai Lama, probably the current Dalai Lama, who knows? But he said, "Be kind whenever possible. It's always possible." So I think that's true.
It is true. That is true. Long way.
Well, I have a question. I want to talk a little bit because I know a couple of us, Tanja works in the diversity field. I do some of that as well. And I'm curious about when we talk about in-group and cross-group networking. So, for example, there's a lot now about, people of color, working with people of color. I can speak, and this is where I think, well, I'll just say for myself before I try to guess what other people do. So I'm Jewish. And of course, I network everywhere. Tom like every time I talk to Tom, and he's helped refer people both for this show and then for a mental health show that I do for another client. And the people have been so vastly diverse, you know, an Asian American woman who's working in farming and agriculture, you know, it's just a Christian mental health practitioner. Like they're so diverse. I know in my area, we always talk about Jewish genealogy, a little insight into like Jewish genealogy. Like any Jewish person that you meet in Chicago or whatever city from you're from, you go like that's what we do at networking. When Jewish people meet each other, we do our Jewish genealogy so that we can pinpoint the person that we have in common. And it seems like that almost always happens. And so that's something where there's benefits of in, you know, what I would call in group networking. But what do you see as differences between, let's say, trying to connect with people that maybe match you racially, age-wise, things like that, or cross-group networking? Does that make sense? I feel like I'm going to call myself on this one, which I showed you guys before. Is there a question in there?
Yeah, I deduced the question.
Please, can someone help me?
I extrapolated from that a question. Yeah. How, you know, you mentioned that I love having friends. I love having a circle that has a lot of diversity to it. I've always liked that. And I remember, Deanna, you and I were talking recently. I was saying, you know, my dad is a lifelong newspaper editor, retired a few years ago. Great wise man. He launched USA Today. Remember way back like 30 years ago when that first appeared. But he was very interested in the world and different subjects and felt a responsibility to educate people and all that. But I noticed the people that would come over to our house they were all journalists. Like my circle is all. I know a lot of journalists too, which is wonderful. But again, as Lucky knows, I'm definitely a bright, shiny object person where I'm interested in a million things. And I can't imagine living in a world or living in a life where I don't have friends who are Asian, who are Black, who are, you know, whatever the case may be, Russian. And it's just sort of that cross-pollination that makes life so wonderful. I mean, you know, I don't know if it's possible to really rank, you know, like in The Sound of Music, my favorite things. But at the top of my list of favorite things is conversation with fellow human beings, the exchange of ideas, sharing what we're passionate about, and so on. And I have a friend here in Connecticut. He's a consultant he calls it ideation. I call it brainstorming. Companies will bring him in, and I know, you know, Lucky, you and your team do this kind of thing a lot. But it's like for a new product name or a new business strategy or something like that. And he said you can't have the same group of people. Usually, it's like white, middle-aged male people like myself. You know, here I am in Connecticut, right? So it's like if you're in a conference room, all only people like that, how in the world are you ever going to come up with something new, something creative? I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's some great business leaders and humanitarians who fit that profile, but why deprive ourselves of those brilliant ideas and just that synergy? It's real, you know, I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. And just to add to what you're saying, you know, I kind of make it my everyday mission and my duty as a Black man to represent myself as my truest self as a Black man. So what I mean by that is when I walk into rooms, I know sometimes it's just a part of life that when you walk in, some people just put you in a box automatically when they see you. But I feel once they meet me and talk to me and we engage, that's when they can see a different light or a different perspective of somebody who looks like me. And I kind of make it my thing to, you know, wear my locks proudly, wear my fitted hats when I do my sneakers, because I want other people in other communities outside of my community or in my group to look at someone who may look like me or dress like me and say, you know what, let me give this person a chance, or let me converse with them and share ideas because they may have something to offer that I didn't even expect. And that's been the blessing of my life. You know, in group has been great for me because it kept me within my circle, but out group is where I grew and where I blossomed more because I was able to accept more ideas, which is also why I tell a lot of my friends, you know, get off your block, get out of your state, go other places, go around the world and see cultures and understand what other people go through. Because sometimes we swear our struggle is the deepest, but once you explore the world, you really see a lot broader than you think. And we all have more in common than we realize.
Sure. Yeah. And you know, Tanja, you've written a book about this, I think, about the who are you, about kind of recognize your own identity to then be able to interact with others. Talk more about that.
Absolutely. It's really what Lucky was just saying and what Tom was saying too. in that we have to get out of our own situations, your own neighborhoods. I think for me, the genesis for me kind of writing that diversity journal that takes people actually on an explorative trip, right, journey, is that I feel like our country is so polarized. You're in your neighborhood, you only believe what your friends believe in your circle, you're part of a political party, you only believe what they tell you. There's not a lot of divergence of ideas and critical thinking happening oftentimes. And so you have to broaden and expand your horizons to understand really why people make certain decisions, how people landed where they were, understanding that, being empathetic towards it, but also just having a broader sense of this country. There, 75% of white Americans and 66% of African Americans only have friends in their own ethnic groups. And that tells you a lot about how much then we can relate to one another when you're talking about voting rights or when you're talking about other more robust issues, why people are in their corner to the left and people are in their corner to the right, because they're not getting out and understanding what's happening. And also there's this huge failure of history in our educational system. So the fact that most people didn't know what Juneteenth even was because it's not taught in school. This is something your parents told you, or you found out through action groups or other entities, but you really didn't learn about it in school because a lot of the history and the some of the disparities that happen are buried and hidden because people don't want to admit that they actually happened, but we all know they did. And so that's where you have people forming these opinions. So it's so important for people to get out and get to know one another. And that, you know, one way to really make it simplistic too is if you eat the food, you should have friends in that group. So Hello. So that's one of the things. And I love different like ethnic cuisines. And so, you know, I love Indian, I love Asian and Caribbean and Mexican and all those things. So I actually have friends in those groups. I think I owe it to them if I'm enjoying their heritage and their culture to then invite them into my circle.
Yeah. That's right.
You know, one thing I do want to say on that, actually, and thank you, Stephanie, who's talking about just really taking notes and how exciting the conversation is today. One thing I do find interesting, I'm going on a slight sidebar just on Juneteenth, only because I was one of those people who kind of heard about it, but I had to write a whole article about it for a client, Executive Diversity Services. So if you have any questions, I can now tell you and recite the whole history. But as I was doing it, when people first started about celebrating Juneteenth, it was like, oh, that's that African-American holiday. Except that, and again, looking at CrossGroup things, you know, as Jews, we celebrate 6,000 years now since we were freed as slaves in Egypt, you know, during Passover. And if you think about the day that all people were finally free within the United States, that's not that. I mean, that's a U.S. American thing. That's a big deal. You know, I just thought that was significant, even just as things played out in the media. And until you start asking and talking, you don't always understand those connections or that significance and depth and what it means to people. All right. So a couple more things here. One is ultimately, I do want, if you want to start thinking about what the return on investment is. I know we're making friends. We don't want to talk about that, but ultimately time is time and time is money. But before I go there, look at me manifesting all my nervous habits. When I know for me, when I perceive that there's a power differential, I don't know what to ask. I get really stymied. And I'm thinking, you know, so Lucky, you know, previously did all the social media for Billy Porter. You're constantly in rooms where people are these, you know, are big celebrities. How do you look at me, look at my body language? How do you actually like act normal if you feel like you're intimidated by someone that you are networking with? It? You might not even have business with them, but even just making conversation.
Yeah.
So,
you know what it is? The one blessing about me moving on those worlds is I've never really been starstruck. I think the only person that ever had me starstruck was Prince, and I'm guilty of that one because I screamed. So guilty.
I'll
But
put the link to the story about the woman screaming in your
you
Prince
did?
video. No, I will. I'll share that
Okay.
story in the link
Um,
for the video
but
or in this.
when I'm in those rooms, I see them just as people, just as I am. I remember, I look at myself and my personal, I reflect in my own mirror, and I know that I have hiccups, I have hang-ups, I have doubts about myself. I go through things, and I know that these people that I'm in the same room with, despite their success or the level that they may be on to society, they're human and they're people just like me, and that's how I approach them, which is why it's easy for me to kind of get relationships with people that I don't know, because my approach is just from a point of love and respect and finding common ground and understanding that, you know, nobody's better than anybody in that room. You know what I mean? And their reaction to my approach will only be a sign of who they truly are as a person rather than a reflection of myself.
That is really amazing. It's going back to the idea of starting with love and kindness. I love that idea of just going back to that point when you don't know what to do. Don't worry about you. It's not about performance. It's about just what can you bring that's loving and kind here.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Tom, you're really humble about this stuff. So Tom will be like so humble. And, you know, each time you talk, actually, I just in getting ready for today saw that you interviewed Paul McCartney like 5 times. Every once in a while you'll drop, there's like the photo of you and I think Dick Cavett. There's the photo of you and Muhammad Ali. Your friends, I think you're on a board with Jane Pauley.
Right.
So I'm throwing all this stuff and I guarantee you there is no way he's
And
probably
here I am with
blushing.
you guys. I love it. This is what I'm really focused on. But thank you for mentioning those names.
I know, because I know you wouldn't do it because you're subtle about it. So it sounds like then you too, Tom, like everyone's a person. Like there's not a hierarchy.
Well, exactly. I was thinking, again, I was thinking about diversity and whatnot and what stories I might share today. And so I'll give you real quick, see if I can do this in 60 seconds. But one of my favorite moments, one of my favorite days was the day that I spent with Miles Davis, because I've been producing interviews with for a late night CBS show in Washington, and moved up Dick Cavett, who you mentioned, late night host, great guy. I'm so happy he's still around, still smart and sharp and all that. He hired me for a number of months to produce interviews. And so I've been trying to get an interview with Miles Davis. His lawyer found where I was, said, hey, Miles would like you to show up at his apartment tomorrow and talk him into coming on the show. I thought, oh, well, I've heard he's a really difficult character. I'm thrilled to have this chance, but I don't know, And so my boss, he had been a previous executive producer for Johnny Carson and now is working on this show, said, well, yeah, I've heard Miles can be kind of have an attitude issue. It's like he's a legend, for God's sakes. But he said, you tell him he has to perform live on the show or we don't want him. You want me to show up on Miles Davis's doorstep and tell him that? Are you kidding me? But I came in, I asked him, I was respectful. I had my little tape recorder. I'm so happy I recorded our pre-interview, and I've always been interested in magic. And so I did some magic tricks for him, or he brought up magic because he knew that Dick Cavett was into magic also. So here I am, that on my favorite day doing magic tricks for Miles Davis. It's like amazing. And so he showed me his art. Like I said, both Paul McCartney and Miles Davis, Miles was, since he's no longer with us, but Paul is an artist also, not just a musician, a songwriter, but they paint and they sketch and all that. So he wanted to show me all, Miles wanted to show me his artwork and stuff like that. So we found different levels to communicate on. And I will say there was that edge of intimidation a little bit, but once you got past that, it was just such a pleasure, So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just finding that common ground and that enthusiasm, that appreciation, like, wow, you're, not just, oh, you're a celebrity, there's nowhere you can really go with that. And I think they get tired of that for the most part also, But anyway, that's my thought.
I love it. I know starting conversations with children, it's a huge conversation starter is, do you like peanut butter or chocolate better? And maybe that would work with adults as well.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah.
Right, that's a good one. You can go for like 15 minutes on food that way. Tanja, we are getting close to time, but Tanja, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was a flight attendant for many years. And so I ran into a lot of celebrities and I was never honestly starstruck. And also I do think they like their privacy. Oftentimes they would
Right.
even comment that thank you, like they knew I recognized them, but they also like, people not bum rushing them for, pictures and, autographs and things like that. But one of the things that my mom always taught me as a little girl is you're as good as anyone else, not better than, not less than, but as good. And I've taken that through life. So I look at anyone who has acclaimed a certain amount of success is they were really focused on excellence. I'm focused on excellence. So like we all are kind of in the game, but we're playing in different positions in the game.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I like that a lot. Yeah, that makes so much sense. All right, we have 2 more things to do. It's always amazing. Well, it's not amazing to me. You have fascinating people that we all get to have a conversation. It's no surprise that it went really fast. So there's 2 other things that we need to. I have one more question, but before we get to our question, let's do our flash exercise. All right. I always like for dramatic effect to take off. Now, wait, I'm ready to work out. All right. So the flash exercise is very important because we want people to remember kind of the theme of the show, and some people remember things differently. So I always like to do an exercise that relates to the theme of the show. So our exercise today is for your rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is in your shoulder. And this exercise, so I invite everyone to do it with me, you all to do it with me. And then also, if you're watching, if you can just do this from your chair. I'm going to put myself big screen for just a second to show you the exercise. So it's a rotator cuff. Oh, look at that. I'm not showing off my muscles. You are. All right. So it's so you're right here like this, like your muscle man move, and put your hands like this. And I want you to just come down and lift, down and up and down and up. So that is a rotator cuff move. Elbows are shoulder height. And then we're just coming down. Can anyone guess why this is really good as a networking thing? Because you can never go wrong making the first move and going, hi, how are you? It's so good. Oh, hello. Good to see you. Oh, Pasha, it's great. So
I'm done with you.
Yeah, I have some ideas for folks that as we transition back to in-person networking, that, sometimes in these large venues, it's so easy, to Lucky's point, you forget people's name, but you might not forget who they are or their face. So one of the things I coach my clients on is think of 3 memorable things about you and accentuate those, because that's how people will remember you. More than likely, they will not remember your name, honestly. So like for me, people always remember my height when they meet me in person. They always remember I have an interesting name. They will not remember exactly what it is, and they'll top it up. They'll know it's something different.
Yes.
And then they'll usually comment on either my confidence or my smile.
Yes.
I think I did all of those.
My name has been like my greeting card for the past 15 years. Because as soon as people hear me say Lucky Church, automatically they usually remember that because they've never heard it before. So you're spot on. And you just sold another book to me over here.
Look at this, how networking can happen just by doing this. Because Stephanie now just figured out that, Tom, you and she have a common denominator in Jamie Wyeth, Iris at Sea. So let's connect. So that's there. It really is about just making that overture. I think what we're going to have to do, if you all don't mind, is have a second panel on this, because what we didn't talk about, which I know people are interested in, which is the return on investment. And honestly, what I'm hearing from this conversation is that may just be the wrong question. When we look at about kindness and being nice and sharing love, that maybe that comes first.
I definitely do that. I'll give you 20 seconds, and it's not a tip, but I will just say that I think I really believe when you create that space of kindness and support and genuine interest, it does help business. So it's not like we're putting that aside, forget about it. I think it does work that way. Not why I do it. I don't know why any of us do it. But I think it does create a safe space where business happens and growth happens. So that's my opinion.
I
Well,
agree.
Tom said is that it goes like if kindness that builds it. I think it goes back to that old adage too. People like to do business with people they like. You
Yeah.
know, so
And I always say, leave the ulterior motives at home.
mhm.
When you come with a motive to something, sometimes you miss the blessing that was supposed to be there. And by not letting the conversation go organically and just talking and opening yourself up to people. I mean, we all have been hurt before, but the one thing I've never done with being hurt in relationships, whether they were business or personal, is I never allowed that pain to stop me from exposing my heart, because that's important. And that's how you develop and you grow and you become stronger. You know what I mean? Hearts will always be broken, but you'll live to fight another day.
Is that Celine Dion? Hearts? Or, I don't know.
Right. And to Lucky's point also,
Wait, I have no problem dancing on my show. I'm blushing because now that just opened the door for me to sing, like when people remind me of stuff on every show going forward. I'm sorry, Tanja.
I was about to say also to Lucky's point about kindness and not having motives, oftentimes things just happen through manifestation, right? You might not get the business in that first introduction, but it might come a year, it might come 2 years later. But the thing about being memorable and being authentic is people will remember that feeling. And if they're not ready for whatever you're offering at that moment, they'll always have it in the back of their minds for when it can work for them.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes. Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
Anything. And this is a point just to Tom and Tanja. You know, we as people who seem to be on what some consider an elite level, but we are still people that are coachable. And I am coachable. I'm learning every day. I learned in this conversation. I learn all the time from Tom. I'm learning now from Tanja, who's about to be another mentor in my book to me. So get ready. I'm about to come get you. Always look at yourself as a ball of clay that's constantly being molded to be a better version of yourself. And you know, as my grandmother used to say, when you stop learning, you're dead, you know, and I want to live as long as possible and I want to absorb as much knowledge as I can. And that you can also apply to when you're networking as well.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being on Intercultural Spark. And next week, it's kind of fun. I have actually one of my former interns coming on, and Lynn Hazen has two of interns about the whole intergenerational approach now. It's not like I'm the boss, get me coffee. Now it's really how do you learn leadership? How do you learn tech? So the whole new dynamic of internships. That is next Thursday at 10 a.m. on Intercultural Spark. Thank you all so much for being here. Don't hang up. I'm going to close out our show and then we'll all say goodbye. Thank you. Really fabulous. Thank you all.